The White House is working to ramp up the pace of evacuations out of Afghanistan, where thousands are desperate to flee the Taliban's rule. Despite promises of a peaceful takeover, Taliban members fired gunshots into the air outside the airport Wednesday morning, sending crowds running. In the eastern city of Jalalabad, Taliban members cracked down on protesters who took down the Taliban flag and replaced it with the Afghan national flag. It happened on the eve of Afghanistan's Independence Day, Thursday. Local health officials say one person was killed and 6 others were wounded. Witnesses say the number of dead is higher. U.S. officials say about 2,000 diplomats, security staff, and aid workers and Afghans were evacuated from Kabul between Tuesday and Wednesday morning. That includes more than 300 American citizens. In a briefing Wednesday, Pentagon officials said they're working with the Taliban as evacuations continue.
The Taliban are in and around Kabul right now, but they are not interfering with our operations. Through the State Department, the Taliban are facilitating the safe passage to the airport for American citizens, that is, U.S. passport holders. We also have a risk, as you saw the other day, of unarmed innocent civilians massing on the airfield, where they became a safety hazard to our airplanes, our air crews, and also to themselves. And we currently have that situation under control inside the airfield.
Officials struggle to explain how they would help people who say they cannot get to the airport. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin admitted the military does not have the capability to extend operations beyond Kabul's airfield. Meanwhile, we are learning more about the intelligence community's assessment of the situation leading up to the U.S. withdrawal. A senior official tells CBS News, quote, "We consistently identified the risk of a rapid collapse of the Afghan government." Also, this afternoon, U.S. health officials announced plans to distribute COVID-19 booster shots to adults to protect against the Delta variant. The Biden administration says it will make those available starting September 20th. We'll have more on the rollout plan. President Biden's approval rating dipped below 50% this month for the first time since he took office. An average of polls shows that rating hovering around 49.3%. And we should note those numbers are believed to be a reflection of attitudes toward the pandemic response and predate the troubled exit from Afghanistan. For more, let's bring in Catherine Herridge, Jacqueline Alemany, and Nicholas Wu. Catherine is CBS News senior investigative correspondent. Jackie is a congressional correspondent for The Washington Post and author of their Power Up newsletter. And Nicholas is a congressional reporter for Politico. Welcome to you all. Catherine, what is the status of the evacuation now, and what steps will be taken to expand it?
Well, Elaine, it was clear from the news conference at the Pentagon that they are laser focused on keeping the Kabul International Airport secure and ramping up the evacuation of American citizens, our allies, as well as the Afghans who assisted us. What was also clear at that news conference is how heavily dependent we are right now on the goodwill of the Taliban, and equally how little leverage we have with the Taliban to make good on their promises of safe passage to that airport, Elaine.
Well, Jackie, President Biden announced plans to evacuate at-risk Afghans in July. Why wasn't a more comprehensive plan established earlier?
Yes, Elaine, that's something that we've spent the past few days trying to figure out ourselves. And it's something that's had humanitarian aides and experts and people who are currently scrambling to evacuate, not just our Afghan allies who supported the U.S. mission, but also Americans, why that has been such a last-minute scramble and why the Biden administration didn't act earlier. Countless humanitarian aides applied outside pressure on the White House to ramp up the special immigration visa program for Afghans and knock down some bureaucratic hurdles all the way in May, shortly after Biden announced his final withdrawal plan. And they claimed that they were ignored by the administration, then went public with their pressure and kept encouraging them to ramp up the program so that they could begin evacuations for what is traditionally been a very long and winding process as soon as possible. You also, at the same time, have lawmakers who are now criticizing the administration as well for dragging their feet. There was a bipartisan working group that also applied pressure on the White House and tried to work with them as closely as possible in order to craft legislation that would actually knock down those legislative barriers. They did finally do so, but they said that it happened far too late. The conclusion that many people are coming to, including these humanitarian aides, that really the only reason they see for this foot dragging are a political calculus by this White House and a reticence to ramp up our refugee intake that they said was sort of a fad, a trend started by Biden early in the administration when he refused to raise the refugee cap after promising to do so on the campaign trail.
Yeah, that was something I remember really prompted some fierce backlash from members of his own party when that first happened, and there was a scramble to sort of change the messaging and the policy on that. But, you know, Catherine, a moment ago you talked about this sort of dependence on the goodwill of the Taliban in terms of ensuring a safe passage for people who are trying to get out. So when it comes to Americans who are outside of Kabul, realistically, what are the options for getting them out of the country?
Well, Elaine, there aren't a lot of good options. If we could dial back the clock, ideally, we would still be in control of Bagram Airport. That was the military airport, and having that extra airfield would really rapidly expand our ability to not only get out Americans, but also to up the tempo of those evacuations. What we heard at the Pentagon today from the Defense Secretary is they do have an option called a military extraction. That is only used in what they call extremis or extreme situations. So that is the kind of tactic or option you can use when someone is in grave danger, but it's not something that can be done on a massive scale. So to bottom line it, there aren't a lot of great options for Americans outside of Kabul, and the options are even worse for our allies and the Afghans who are outside of Kabul.
Meantime, Nicholas, in an exclusive interview with our CBS San Francisco station KPIX Tuesday night, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said this about upcoming hearings Congress plans to hold.
Our chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee has announced today to our caucus that there would next week, early next week, be a hearing on this subject with the highest level of officials in the Biden administration. That is Congress's role, the role of oversight, and that will take place early next week. At least it will begin then.
So, Nicholas, what are lawmakers hoping to learn, and who might be called on to testify?
Well, it's a little soon to know exactly what lawmakers want to learn from what's a very fluid situation on the ground in Afghanistan. But as we've seen, both key House and Senate panels have called for top Biden administration officials to come and testify about Afghanistan. And what we can expect to see here is probably not only some kind of accounting for what went wrong during the 20 years that America was in Afghanistan, but specifically what went wrong in these past few months is in this very chaotic and in this very chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so Democrats are likely to call top officials like Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to hear from them. But, you know, it is worth remembering that Democrats are the ones driving the bus here in the House and Senate. And so criticism of the Biden administration might be somewhat more muted in these hearings, but there is this real bipartisan anger about the execution of the withdrawal here.
Well, Catherine, there is a lot of finger pointing happening right now, but based on what we know, was this exit strategy an intelligence failure and a military failure?
Well, Elaine, I spoke with a former senior Defense Department official earlier today, and I asked him whether this was a military, a policy, political, or diplomatic failure, and he said all of the above. They all work in sync, if you will, to bring us to where we are today. What we heard at the news conference at the Pentagon a short time ago from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Milley, is that no one anticipated in all of the scenarios they considered that the Afghan military and the government would collapse in just 11 days. But I can tell you that in a complex situation like this, they do something called red teaming. That's when you look at this problem set from a number of different angles, and you look to see what would be called the black swan event, the absolutely unexpected, unlikely outcome. And what we're seeing unfold in Afghanistan right now is really that black swan event. Everyone is saying they did not anticipate the disintegration and the deterioration of the government and the military at the same time. But I just want to say a couple of points here. Number one, not everything has been a failure in Afghanistan. It's easy to see it through that lens. But for 2 decades, they were able to get a lid on al-Qaeda and ISIS and other terrorist groups and to prevent another 9/11, which is the first reason that we went there in the first place. And my military contacts say the Afghan forces did have the will to fight hard for a significant period of time. Tens of thousands were killed, but at the end of the day, we kind of pulled the rug out from under them in terms of support, and they clearly didn't want to fight for a government that ultimately abandoned them.
Yeah, I wonder if you can talk about that a bit more, Catherine, because I have been seeing accounts from people who were in theater talking about that very point, is that this notion of President Biden saying that there was not the will to fight there doesn't tell the whole story because of the way in which those forces were trained. They were trained with air support. They were trained with medevac help. They were trained with all of these things that were no longer going to be available to them. And so there was a calculation that had to be made. I mean, is that what you're hearing from your sources as well?
Well, I'm glad you raised that, Elaine. I think there's sort of 2 components to this discussion. Number one, what I'm hearing consistently on a background basis is that the Afghan forces did fight hard. They took some heavy losses, and tens of thousands of people died trying to protect their country. Number two, we built a military. We went from boot camp to the front line with these individuals, and they had the benefit not only of our support on the ground and supply lines, but I think most significantly, they had the support of that air cover. When you start to pull away all of that support from the air, from the ground, and I think most importantly, the supply lines, what you find is that you have gutted a military. You've not only made it harder for them to operate, but you've also undercut their will to fight. You have to balance that with the fact that they've had years to get ready for this. And my contacts say everybody knew from the outset that the day would come when the U.S. would get out and they'd have to stand on their own. That day finally came, and they were unable to do that in a very dramatic way.
All right, Jackie, turning to the pandemic, the White House on Wednesday recommended that all Americans get a COVID-19 booster shot 8 months after their second dose. What can you tell us about this rollout plan?
Yeah, Elaine, the White House announced today that starting September 20th, it is, I believe, they're going to administer 100 million booster shots that are going to protect people who are already vaccinated against the Delta variant. They also announced that simultaneously they're going to administer or donate 200 million doses to other countries, according to Jeffrey Zients, the White House coronavirus response coordinator. And that comes in the wake of some criticisms that the U.S. is already administering booster shots while the rest of the world remains unvaccinated. But the White House has a pretty challenging task ahead of them. Rochelle Walensky, the head of the CDC, notified reporters today that the U.S. is averaging 500 deaths per day because of the coronavirus still. That is on top of the tally of over 600,000 people that have already died. And these deaths have spiked and continued because there is still a substantial portion of the population that has refused to get vaccinated. So while the White House is going to be trying to ramp up these booster shots for people, they're also simultaneously going to be still trying to convince those who are vaccine hesitant or who simply haven't found a way to access the vaccine in the United States to convince them to get vaccinated as well, to get those first and second vaccine doses to curb that spike in coronavirus deaths that we're seeing right now that's overwhelming hospitals around the country.
Finally, Nicholas, after several missed deadlines, lawmakers say they are still negotiating a police reform bill. And you report that qualified immunity, one of the main sticking points, is off the table. That's the protection that shields officers from civil liability. So what does this mean for the prospect of reaching a deal?
Well, even though they've taken this main sticking point off the table, the prospects for a deal are still quite murky. And people close to the negotiations stress to us that even though this might be off the table, nothing is final until it actually is final in these negotiations. And so, like you mentioned, they've been talking for months and months about this without any particular breakthrough in these negotiations, with qualified immunity, this doctrine shielding police officers from a civil liability, and prosecutions of police officers really being some of the main hurdles there. So even if you take one of these big issues off the table, there's still a whole lot that negotiators need to work through in order to press forward. And so what we've heard right now from lawmakers is that there's talk about doing some kind of skinny proposal, which would take some of these thornier provisions, the qualified immunity, the prosecutions of police officers, off the table, and only focus on what they actually agree on, that being things like limiting chokeholds or transfers of military equipment to police departments. But the question is then, if lawmakers come to some sort of agreement there, will that be enough to satisfy both progressive Democrats who really wanted this qualified immunity provision in there, and civil rights groups who had also wanted a much more wide-ranging bill to be produced? And so this is something that we're going to be watching very closely, even as the clock ticks down in the legislative calendar.
All right, Catherine Herridge, Jacqueline Alemany, and Nicholas Wu, thank you all very much.